Well, hello. I'm Jade Powell. I'm with the Southeastern Utah Association of Local Governments, and I'm the coordinator for the Silicon Slopes East group. We're located here in Coal Country, in Carbon and Emery County. What started out as a part of the Utah Coal Country Strike Team efforts, we've now launched in March, and now we're going to be holding these monthly events. So welcome to one of our first ever live stream event. The Silicon Slopes East has a threefold mission that we're hoping to accomplish. The first is to highlight and to showcase the tech businesses and the tech industry that exists here in Coal Country. Something that someone has said best kind of sums up what we hope to accomplish is work more the hardware, while the Silicon Slopes group up in Lehigh and along the Wasatch Front is more the software. The second goal of ours is to promote the remote working capabilities that are here in Carbon and Emery counties. We do have fiber to the home as well as to the business, but also we have a newly renovated that we're sitting in remote working space that we're pretty excited to start to launch and to invite people to come work remotely in this co-working space. The third is to help and aid in the entrepreneurial spirit that's alive and well here in Carbon and Emery counties by holding events to help young entrepreneurs get on their feet and get their business going and successful. So that's a little background about what Silicon Slopes East is all about. We're here to have a panel discussion all around development in the Carbon and Emery County region, as well as throughout southeastern Utah. I'll turn the time over now to our moderator, and he'll introduce the rest of our panelists and take it away.
Thank you, Jade. Hello, fellow train robbers. I'm Garrett Clark. I'm the Director of Operations at Silicon Slopes, and we're excited to be out here in Coal Country. This is the second event we've done in the last 5 months. We had a really good kickoff event in the early spring, and we appreciate Jerry and Jade and all the work they've done to get this up and running. It's a really good chapter, and we're excited to see the work that gets done. I'll let the panel introduce themselves, starting with you, Bobby.
Yeah, so Bobby Houston, born and raised here in Price, Utah, so work out at Intermountain Electronics as our Vice Chairman and Director of Mission Critical Business.
Kyle Roberts, Executive Managing Director at Newmark Knight Frank, focus on supply chain optimization, the entire stack of capital markets, and development and disposition.
J.R. Howa, born and raised Salt Lake with Mountain West Commercial Real Estate, focused primarily on multifamily as well as construction management and development of multifamily.
Cool, thank you. So the protocol for COVID-19 events is you can take your mask off when you're talking, put it back on when you're not.
Got it.
Cool, so let's start with
failed already.
With Bobby and Kyle talking about kind of the national trends that you guys are seeing now and in the last probably 3 or 4 months.
So, excuse me, it's probably easiest to characterize what's happened in the last 3-4 months with the backdrop of remembering that we're living in the biggest supply chain shift in human history. Transition from traditional brick and mortar retail for everything from groceries to non-perishable goods, and that transformation of supply chain has really driven the industrial markets across North America, primarily port-centric communities and communities then that provide distribution nodes that reach population bases. So that was already a upsetting and constantly evolving process that had us working on supply chain optimization efforts, which mean from manufacturing through distribution or end user, whether it's business to business or direct to consumer or it's e-commerce and orientation, whatever that individual supply chain for a company is. And what we'd seen for probably prior 15 years was either natural disaster or some form of fires in California that were devastating, things of that nature that created pretty significant disruption to supply chain. But what was available was a network of distribution and supply chain elsewhere within the region or elsewhere within the country, or just-in-time delivery from manufacturing partners in Asia or otherwise, that would backfill that gap. What we've experienced in the COVID period is none of those things are available. So in the middle of the largest supply chain shift in human history, we are experiencing the largest amount of disruption to that supply chain in human history. So what we're finding is a lot of companies that are going back to the drawing board and working back from what used to be what's referred to as a lean supply chain. So only carry as much inventory as you need, only carry as much inventory as you need for a manufacturing process or to meet consumer demand for store fulfillment or things of that nature. And that's a just-in-time inventory strategy. And what everybody is having to reflect on now is that good enough, and do we need to move to a just-in-case inventory strategy? And that works across all products within the industrial sector, whether it's warehouse manufacturing, last mile delivery, e-commerce, et cetera, because there's been so much strain placed on particularly consumer goods like hand sanitizers and toilet paper and otherwise. So the question that's facing American logistics right now is how do we become more self-sustaining and self-sufficient without being as reliant on international trade partners to provide those types of consumer staples, and then more advanced manufacturing that can't be interrupted for obvious reasons like ventilators and all the PPE that we were short going into this crisis. And that's pushing a lot of the companies that have an international presence, the 3Ms of the world, pharma companies that are producing pharmaceuticals overseas that are coming back, and both as a result of regulatory pressure and governmental pressure, as well as recognition that they simply can't meet the consumer demand if there's another crisis like this, how they will feed that supply chain. And that means that there is already some nearshoring and reshoring of manufacturing that's coming back to the United States, mostly in kind of port-centric communities right now, but that is the biggest kind of influencing factor in my world today.
And so we've been really fortunate with our business. We don't build a high volume of the same thing over and over again. We're doing a lot of projects where we're chasing these opportunities on these large-scale projects, project by project. So we've been able to be very, very fortunate in the fact that we've always had to be lean on our warehousing and our supply chain and our just-in-time delivery, just simply because of the size of these projects that we're putting together. We just don't have enough space to store all this equipment for 6 months worth of work. And then the lead times are obviously something for us where we have to use those to be very, very competitive. So we've been really, really fortunate to kind of be a little bit ahead of the curve there and not have as big of an impact on our business from a supply chain standpoint. I think the biggest impact we've had are truck drivers getting sick along the route and getting pulled in the middle of a shipment to Virginia, or fans that were coming for overseas that were stocked in these warehouses. Some of the ventilation things have seen the impact where just traditional power distribution equipment and things like that, there just hasn't really been a problem because they're such one-off, custom tailored to each of these projects. We've been really fortunate not to have major impacts from a supply chain standpoint, but from a business segment standpoint, oil and gas is getting slaughtered right now, and it's crazy to see because you see the cyclicality of that, but nothing like this ever. I've never, and anybody in our company's never seen the price of oil per barrel go, minus 30 plus into the negative. It was crazy. So it's bounced back, but luckily our group there has some really solid relationships where we still have a nice backlog for the larger companies that are still investing and still need to move forward and kind of weather the storm. So I think from a business segment standpoint, our oil and gas has taken the biggest hit. The others seem to be doing pretty well. I mean, our bright spot is our mining industry is having a record year. That's what we started in, which is a surprise for where mining is as a whole. And then obviously our data center business is in its infancy. We're less than 2 years in, but we're seeing some very, very solid progress there And obviously, the cloud service providers and anybody that's running their business leaning on cloud service providers are just booming right now. So
The stress I was referring to in supply chain is primarily in transportation.
Yeah.
Getting raw materials or transportation, and there's driver shortages everywhere.
yeah, so we've got requests that we haven't seen before where the customers are requiring GPS on the trucks and daily updates to know where they're at, what's going on. Permitting that's typically taken, 3 to 4 days is now taken up to 14 days in some states. And so that's a little bit of a challenge that we haven't dealt with before, but honestly, with our custom manufacturing and our program or project-to-project opportunities that we've had, we've just been really, really fortunate not to have as dramatic of an impact that other companies and manufacturers of kind of a commoditized standard product are dealing with.
Yeah.
So we've been lucky there.
Diversified at the right time a little bit.
Oh, it's been a 15, 20-year learning curve, but it's working pretty good right now.
Good. And JR, anything to add on the commercial side?
Yeah, I was just going to add, kind of the multifamily sector has been, obviously since the kind of depression of 2008, a lot of millennials saw their parents potentially lose their homes, and so they kind of went to the model of, I would much rather rent than buy, and also just the overall savings of that group. And, for the last 12 years, we've just seen rents increase so rapidly, as well as the development, and I think we're going to see another really big shift here in the next, maybe 90 to 120 days with people coming out of COVID. The office sector, a lot of people are now working from home, and a year ago, people are like, no, I want a much smaller space, I want 650 square feet, and now they've been cooped up for the last 90 days, working from home, realizing they can. And we think there's going to be a demand shift for, larger units as we see some of these office users, start allowing employees to work from home. So I think the next 90 days there's going to be a significant shift just in the development of multifamily. So.
Yeah, interesting. There's a lot of moving targets. Kyle, and we'll start with you. Can you give a rundown of the last 10 to 12 years of technology-related growth as it pertains to real estate, whether it's light industrial tech, office space?
Sure.
Where it's been located, and where do you think it's going?
So the primary base for industrial product in the state of Utah is along the Wasatch Front. And it's roughly 250 million square feet of industrial product that spans all, from distribution to manufacturing, flex space, R&D, that type of thing. And the bulk of the growth has occurred in the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake County particularly. Some of that is land constraint and entitlement, not that the communities themselves wouldn't be ideal locations for those things, but industrial has oftentimes had the connotation of smokestacks and dirty and pipe lay down yards and those types of things that people don't want in their backyard. So that concentration has been primarily in the northwest quadrant. It's in the last 12 years grown by about 25%. We have become a net super regional distribution market as a state, all across the state with super regional boxes that are built that are doing store fulfillment or e-commerce fulfillment. Has been a huge driver of that growth. But interestingly, our market, just in the state of Utah in general, is 40% manufacturing. And it is the only state in the union that can boast that. And it's the only state in the union where the manufacturing base is growing at pace with the rest of the industrial base. Most markets have a grossly outweighted warehouse distribution growth versus manufacturing. So what the saying always goes, for us supply chain guys in Utah, what's bad for California is good for Utah. And I think the regulatory and tax environments and processes for entitlement and anything from cold chain distribution through medical device manufacturing, there's just a tremendous amount of interest and growth in that segment. A lot of that has also been due to support by the state of Utah, GOED, EDCU, the Governor's Cluster Initiative. All those things were primers to kind of set the stage to have that happen. I'd say the biggest technological shift in the manufacturing side is a move to Kaizen lean manufacturing practices, particularly in northern Utah County, where you have plus minus $20 billion a year nutraceutical and health and beauty industry that was kind of grown organically. So it's, you don't have the P&Gs of the world that are coming in and putting in their lean manufacturing practices. So unless it's somebody that innately has that capability and is coming with that level of expertise, it can both cause growth and then impede efficiency. So what we've seen is adoption of a lot of those types of principles and reorientation of everything from racking systems and warehouse management and enterprise systems that are historically were extremely expensive. If you had to go out and do an SAP implementation, which is probably one of the largest, and he's laughing, he sounds like he might have done one, it's going to cost 3 times as much and take twice as long as you expect, and most companies just can't absorb that kind of capital investment. So what has happened is we've seen a tremendous amount of off-the-shelf, smaller scaled to the size of business types of warehouse management software systems that will run narrow aisle pick pack, will allow for inventory management, that will allow for accounting modules to be popped on. A lot of those things are developed here in Utah, really all over the place. So on the warehouse distribution side, it's absolutely in material handling and the investment people are making in it to go up to be efficient, particularly as land is more expensive and we are becoming supply constrained. And then in the manufacturing side, it's just really the adoption of lean manufacturing principles and the recognition that Utah, the entire state of Utah, has an unbelievably educated, motivated workforce, close to natural resources, great for distribution, regulatory environment that's very friendly. I hear from clients that we work with, I'm in the middle of a deal right now where Utah's operation, plastics manufacturing company, Utah's operation was the only one that wasn't shuttered. And they've got 7 locations across the U.S. of roughly 300,000 square feet. It's a high-tech injection molding operation. And that recognition of Utah's willingness to be more entrepreneurial and not necessarily as reactive as some of the other states and municipalities have been has really, really helped. So I think that trend just continues to accelerate.
Anything to add real quick to that one, Jan?
I would just say, on the tech side, aside from the actual manufacturing, we're seeing obviously a lot of tech office space being built, Wasatch Front, Lehigh. And, one of the things that kind of plays into that on the multifamily side is we had some tech office users that, are so used to everything being, so far in the future that we actually have gone now, we're trying to implement as much tech as they want into a living facility where you can now enter the building obviously with fobs, but there's no keys, there's no nothing. It knows when you're coming and going. The systems, heating, cooling systems learn kind of your schedules, in the units themselves, but also in the main corridors, the amenities area where, maybe the pool is not heated, obviously when it realizes nobody's there. And so I think the technology is just kind of evolving in all asset classes, and it seems like we're kind of following the industrial manufacturing side, it seems like.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's been interesting, the companies that have kind of pitched us on some of the new features and innovations that they're doing in response to COVID over the past 3 months. They're moving quick and scrambling, but there's a lot of good things out there. Probably more geared towards you, Bobby, here for coal country, but how is technology and innovation going to play into helping mold or impact this part of the world?
Yeah, so down here, locally, we're starting to see a few different trends. Just to piggyback a little bit off of, California's challenges and how Utah is benefiting from some of those. When you talk about just the renewable requirements and the mandates from to get to the percentages they need they need to be to for by 2030 for the power that they're consuming. You can see here locally the amount of solar and renewable energy that's going in, 20, 30 minutes from here. You look at some of the technology changes that are going on due to the mandates coming down on the power plants and how they have to get away from coal and get to different types of energy. There's hydrogen-powered generator systems going into the facility in Delta that are going to power large portions of the gap that needs to be filled for California.
Yeah.
That's first of kind. It's something that could be trend-setting for the industry. Hydrogen's scary, but Mitsubishi is working with Los Angeles Power and the facility up there in Delta, and it's in motion. And so I think there's opportunities for us there, because if you look at the amount of transmission and power grid infrastructure that's already put in place, it's so expensive to put those things in there, but the land and the ability to come in here and build those types of renewable energy power sources would be much cheaper than doing it in California where it's mandated, or in any of these other states where that's becoming more and more of a requirement.
Yeah.
So we've started to see and be involved in projects like that. You've seen going on here locally. Past that, it's back to the connectivity and the cloud services, but you talk about smaller, more localized warehouses and things like that. The same can be said for some of these hyperscalers when they're looking at where to build their data centers, whether it's Microsoft or Facebook or those types of companies. They can share and build this infrastructure in these locations where 2 hours away they have the technology and the coverage, that the amount of money that can be saved by building outside of a major location like the Wasatch Front or Phoenix or wherever it may be, Denver, be a lot cheaper if you can find the incentives and the land and the infrastructure that's in place, and that's something we're hoping to capture and make them aware of. But yeah, it's between the connectivity because of the high demand for compute and storage, along with the renewables. Those are the areas where I think we're seeing the biggest impact and the biggest amount of opportunity here locally.
Cool. So for you, Kyle, what real estate assets, in your opinion, and JR as well, chime in here, does this region need for future growth? Obviously, it's always great and prudent to get ahead of the game, so that's the question.
Yeah, so again, to piggyback off the commentary, relative to infrastructure for utilities, from a site selector's point of view, that is always one of the most difficult things to find. And we have abundant and relatively inexpensive natural gas in Utah. Obviously, all the power infrastructure that's here is very difficult to find anywhere in the West. The grids are all stressed to almost the point of failure, if not
There's a lot
already
under
failure.
capacity here
Yeah.
too, is the crazy thing.
Yeah, all that capacity is created, and you have that transitioning workforce from the coal industry and the coal-fired power plant industry. You've got a skill set of people that I think with relatively minor retraining and the facilities to be able to retrain them and the support to do that so that it's not a cost center for business is something that's critically important. The two things that drive my business from the warehouse side or the logistics business in general are transportation and labor. That's it. I mean, a site selector is going to look at those two things. What's the proximity to the population that you're trying to serve? What's the proximity to the immediate population that you're serving? Then also, can it be super regional in orientation? And so a lot of that is the mode of transportation, whether it's rail, air, or at least in Utah, rail, air, or over the road. Over the road, there are some challenges in terms of geography relative to drive times to population, but with rail infrastructure, and last time I was down here with a number of the commissioners, we took a drive over to the airport, and may sound out there, but I think you guys have there's a real opportunity to do air freight multimodal for small, high-value parcels that are relatively high-velocity turn, but don't necessarily require large volumes of space. So kind of advanced manufacturing, medical device, those kinds of things where you have labor force that's down here. So the utility infrastructure is covered. The issue is going to be transportation infrastructure. And what you'll find is if there's going to be a need for speculative development, it's going to come from companies that need expansion. The capital is better spent in their business than it is going out and buying a building and building it. They're going to spend their money on the equipment and everything else that's going into it. And having the relationships with people that are working with the development community, and I think there's been great connectivity with those of us that do that north and all over the country to Carbon County, so I think that's a real opportunity. And the last piece of it will be just last mile. That's kind of the term du jour. The last mile of transportation for e-commerce particularly is critically important, and I don't know what the dynamics are here, but I would assume that they are very similar to everywhere else, where in this pandemic we've had kind of a seismic shift in the way that consumer behavior has been, where e-commerce was anywhere from, depending on whose stats you look at, 16 to 18% of total retail sales, and that number crested 48% in the first 2 months of COVID. Yeah. And what that means is there are a lot of people, certain demographics, generally around age, that have not adopted e-commerce as they want the experience of going out and shopping. They want to go see their shopkeeper. They want to do those things. And not everything can be handled with e-commerce. But those that have adopted it and recognized the ease that it creates in their lives, and also the lack of exposure potentially to infectious disease and other things, has just created a huge groundswell in the need for that type of product. So as this general area grows in population, and I know that that's one of the big challenges right now, is to try to create net in-migration back here. Those facilities will become a critical part of what's happening, and their reliance is going to be on availability of workforce. You check that box all day long. The infrastructure for, again, utilities is here, and it's really just going to be identifying areas that are very easy to get in and off interstates, to get to residential communities quickly, to be able to do deliveries, and then access whatever other modes of transportation are that are coming out here.
Gotcha. Great answer. JR, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I would, I think just on the multifamily and or retail/office, it comes down to, piggyback on what Kyle said, transportation, jobs, and overall utilities. A lot of times, one of the biggest burdens of actually building a multifamily complex where you could stack anywhere from 30 to 300 people is the utility lines that are in the street, the water, the sewer, and those can oftentimes be prohibitive. And also, I think one of the big components is, working with city governments as well as brokers, developers, such as Kyle, on knowing what groups could potentially be looking to come into a market and being able to do it simultaneously. I think one feeds off of the other, and if you can get the city on board and the industrial community and the office community to actually have a conversation of what's happening, I think it just all ties together, and we can address the jobs, the transportation, and the infrastructure.
So the real estate guys have talked about the assets needed. How do we get those into coal country and your part of the world?
Yeah, I think a big part of what we're looking for, and one challenge we're facing now that the local commissioners and everybody has been really, and then some of the elected officials within Price and Helper have been really helpful, is trying to figure out a plan for housing. We have some pretty significant growth goals here over the next several years, and our biggest challenge is just simply going to be housing. And so we've definitely identified that as being something that's going to be tough for us, and the community has responded very well on how we can make that happen. But yeah, to create the assets, I mean, the reason for our growth is really just the diversification and the investment back in the company. I mean, we're obviously family-owned and growth-focused, and so the money and the investments are all going back into the business to be able to stabilize. Our founder grew up in the coal mining industry and dealt with the cyclicality of that on both sides of the table. And it's tough. You get years where you're booming, you get years where you got to send people home, and those are brutal conversations to have. And so that's pushed us to try to take our complementary skill set and apply it to these other areas, which has been a challenge because you go into these scenarios where you're faced with not knowing what you don't know, and so those can create some tough situations. But we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of good, solid people who are up for the challenge and work really hard to make sure that when we decide we're going to go make a transition into oil and gas or utilities or renewables or data centers, that we're going to see it through and do it successfully, and we've been very fortunate to do that. So for us, the biggest reason for our growth has just been the investment from our founder back in, all the people and the manufacturing assets needed and equipment to do it at a high level of quality, as well as just not settling for and getting complacent or I want to use the word lazy, but just staying in one area and being happy with that. We've had to branch out, and that's the biggest reason for how we've been able to create more growth and more people moving into the community and staying.
Yeah, staying's a big part. Kyle and JR, same question. How does this region create those assets?
It's going to be demand-based. It truly will be. So I keep forgetting, sorry. It's going to be demand-based. So it's a function of being able to quantify what organic demand is here for companies that are expanding and are going to be willing to lease rather than own, if you're going to try to bring in external capital investment from that perspective, and or build to suit if that's a straight down the fairway proposition for most investor developers. But overall, it's going to be showing a velocity of job creation and or industry creation that is going to create that demand to get people willing to come down and spec buildings. When you're talking about a $20, $30 million asset, and you have to be able to fill it in a relatively short period of time in order to make it pencil, that's not an easy proposition if you can't really prove up the demand. So I think that side of the equation is what's really going to drive industrial development down here on a spec basis. But if there's a need, if there's a company that has a need down here, finding somebody to build for them what they want built is not a problem. Even with the current challenges, there is more capital in the industrial real estate space probably than any other segment of commercial real estate right now. I mean, billions and billions and billions of dollars. And funds are being formed constantly, runs the whole gambit of merchants all the way through people that want to be long-term hold investment. And so I think that component of facilitating the growth of business that's here is that gap's easy to bridge. It just has to be a deal to do.
Yeah, and to Kyle's point, I think it's all demand driven. We've obviously looked at the Carbon County area as well as other counties in Utah, and when you have a net migration, it's hard to justify going into a market like that and looking at building multifamily or office without having something in tow. And I think to Kyle's point, you almost have to have that group do the build a suit for them, and at the same time, once you see population growth, people moving back, then I think it's a lot easier to justify the multifamily. But with people leaving, it's really hard to kind of pencil in when you don't need the housing sometimes.
Okay. All right, last question for the panel, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, both in person and digital. But do you think this, we'll start with you, Bobby, do you think this region has potential to have a data center? Would it be a good fit? Is it plausible? Is it feasible?
So, as of right now, we're actually working on this with the commissioners and some of the other local business owners, and there's some definite challenges. But when you talk about the grid infrastructure that's already here, you talk about the airport that's there with some minor modifications to what's out there, could easily be able to suit the needs. But the biggest challenge is just going to be the distance to the actual end users and the customers, as well as just the connectivity with the dark fiber that's available. We've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time at some of these hot spots like Ashburn, Virginia, Northern Virginia area, Phoenix, Los Angeles, up Pacific Northwest, and there's a trend of moving some of these facilities a little further outside of these larger cities, but there's still some boxes we need to check here to go out there and put these incentives and the types of reasons why we think they can come here and why they should come here. But there's pieces already coming into place and good reasons why on some of the most challenging parts of it when you talk about the renewables that are being put in place down there in Emery County next to where the grid interconnects are. Emery Telecom's ability and already proven track record to run lines out to one of these hyperscaler locations. So if we were going to target somebody, if you talk about hyperscalers versus your wholesale data center providers and everybody else, obviously we'd chase the hyperscalers like crazy because we felt like if we can vet it out to that level of a data center operator, those are the ones that everybody else is chasing. So they'll put their infrastructure in place and everybody else seems to follow. So that's our kind of long-term shoot for the moon goal, is to continue to fill out this information, put together the materials on what we have available here, and just keep taking it back to them until we got all the boxes checked. Just keep pushing and pushing.
Gotcha. So the wheels are in motion.
The car started.
Got it. Kyle, do you have anything to add?
I know very little about data centers, so I would be talking not as an expert, so
You
I'll
know people
pass.
that can build them.
Yeah, well, yeah, the appetite and the capital investment for a data center is actually a lot less market focused. So, for instance, if you're building an asset and it needs to be leased and there's an exit, people are going to look at the critical mass around it. I think data centers probably, my observation of that, the capital markets component of that is that that's less important. It's more what is the infrastructure and capability of that particular data center. And they typically drive lower cap rates. There are a lot of appetite, a lot of capital for it. It's just kind of the siting aspects that Brad was talking about.
Yeah, one of the other things we skipped over was also, as the Salt Lake area continues to grow, one of the big factors is the risk mitigation just from natural disasters. So if you look at the trend for some of these new sites popping up in the Midwest, or some of those types of areas west of Phoenix and areas like that, we're not that much further away, but we're away from the fault line and some of the challenges that could present. So, but we're still in a nice spot between, all of the interstates, between 70, 80, 15, where you've got pretty reasonable access. But again, that's a big one where can we overcome the distance by mitigating some of the risk associated with the fault line and potential for earthquakes up there in Salt Lake.
Cool. All right. Thank you guys for that. And we have questions digitally, or are we going to go the old-fashioned style of in-person?
We can go, let's start with if anyone in the crowd has any questions, they can ask, and then we've had a couple come online, and I'll ask those.
Okay, cool. Probably, what do you think, 2 or 3 questions in total,
Yeah.
depending on the answers? Cool.
Does everyone feel
President, I'd just like to know your perspective on, you mentioned the data centers and a few other things. What's your perspective on the next step we should take towards some of these infrastructure connections with some of the folks that might help us create that demand?
Who wants to take that one?
Are you talking about, so just making sure we're speaking the same terminology, connections, you're talking about just from a network standpoint of actually vetting out and asking
What
them?
are some steps that the people in this room could take to start to address some of the things that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the main thing, what we've been working on doing and what we've been challenged with is going back and just filling out the feedback we've got from Rocky Mountain Power and the feedback we've got from the commissioners, and we just keep doing the back and forth with, luckily with the business and the group that we've been working with, got a pretty solid network, and it's kind of interesting to see how open and collaborative the data center industry can be. You'll go to these technology summits with these guys, and they're talking about some pretty intellectual property or some things they're doing to be competitive with all their counterparts in the audience, and everybody's pretty open and collaborative and supportive when you bring them new opportunities and new ideas. So what we've been doing is tapping into that network, honestly just pushing back and forth. Are these attractive enough or not? And why, if they're not, why are they not? Then we go back and just go through that repeat cycle of can we address this new challenge? Can we address this new challenge? And so from a just pure infrastructure standpoint between the power and water and renewables and things like that, I think we're making really solid progress. But the next big piece is how can we incentivize, because we can prove that all out, but now we're going to be in competition with all the other small local areas that are trying to do the same thing. And you see those things popping up like crazy all over the U.S. because it's an obvious thing that is having a significant impact on some of these areas that have been challenged with some of the same things we're dealing with here. So from a community standpoint, it's trying to figure out the incentives we have that we can offer, and then yeah, I mean, there's a list of topics we go over basically on a bi-weekly basis that we'd be happy to share with you and tap you into, so you understood what were some of the challenges we're trying to work through. Yep.
I think commissioning a logistics study from a third-party consultant that would support the thesis of distribution from Price as a super regional distribution area. That's where a lot of the demand will come from. There's, again, because of the utility infrastructure that's here, there are opportunities in cold chain, access to the Denver market, into SoCal. There are a number of opportunities, I think, that would exist, but that cost per mile of transport is a really big deal. And also the volume and availability of freight, meaning, do you have full loads coming in, and then do you have full loads going out, because that's what lowers freight cost. And that transportation component of my side of the world is a massive cost driver. It's really the difference between somebody considering a super regional DC in a rural community versus doing it somewhere along I-15 or in St. George to address whatever population they're trying to address. And there are, I can provide a bunch of names of folks that we've worked with in the past, and our firm has the capability to do it as well. But I think having that pre-baked, and those are the answers that site selectors are going to want as they're looking at an individual market, is how can I quantify my transportation cost, my labor cost, and then the entitlement build out and capital outlay that's going to have to go into it. And those two things are not really a municipality's obligation, but understanding what the value proposition for transportation is would be a huge benefit.
And it's kind of crazy to see the uptick just with the improvements that have been made on Highway 6, how much more traffic there is just coming through Price now instead of going down and around up to Salt Lake. So, I mean, I sit there every day and it's just, there's a significant increase of the traffic coming through here, just, simply by improving the road running up north, so.
And they move over so you can pass.
I got to pull out of there every day. It's getting longer and longer to wait, or I got to get more and more brave to gun it out of there.
Anything to add?
I was just going to add, I can't speak to data centers. Kyle says he knows very little, I know even less. So other than incentives, I can't speak to that. I think the construction and development of multifamily office and or retail, I think a lot of that's just demand driven, of where the job's coming from. Is an office, is a large office tenant looking to come down here because of an incentive, whatever that may be, I think that will drive, the potential development of multifamily, bringing people down to the county, and then also, retailers will look at it and see a big influx and maybe see a demand for, additional foods, services, et cetera. So I think it kind of starts with bringing a labor force down and, incentivizing, whether it's a data center or a large industrial group or an office user, will kind of spur the development of everything else.
So we have one question. It kind of relates to what JR was just kind of mentioning, is how has COVID-19 affected the commercial real estate, specifically office space? Do you foresee more businesses moving to more on remote working opportunities?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So, yes, I mean, I think we've seen it on the retail side as well as the office side, and I think now we're seeing it affect the multifamily in the sense of, a lot of restaurants obviously had to shut down. They couldn't service, so they were trying to do curbside pickup or delivery, and then obviously you had PPP. A lot of restaurants, retailers had to lay off their staff, which, caused a lot of them to not be able to pay rent, which then caused landlords to figure out, okay, well, go back and renegotiate with their lenders or try to figure out what next steps are. And I think office, we're going to, obviously a lot of people are still working from home, and as it progresses and, once hopefully COVID gets reined in a little bit, whether there's a vaccine or not, we're actually starting to see large office developers come to the drawing board, with architects saying, okay, we need more space per person than we did 3 years ago, and what kind of measurement, how do we build those into floor plans with, different groups. Some office users are now looking at group A and B, so one group works Monday, Wednesday, the other's Tuesday, Thursday, and then they alternate Friday. So that could grow the per square foot per person, but it may shrink the overall actual floor plate of the office. So that's one, and then on the multifamily side, like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a lot of people that had typically just, slept at their apartments, maybe had, dinner there, but left in the morning, their whole life revolved around outside of it, so they only needed 600 square feet. And now they're coming back saying, okay, if I'm going to work from home, I need more than that. So I think COVID's really caused all the asset classes to really refigure, what people need, what people want, because I think this will be something that we deal with, for the next 5-10 years as we try to get out of this.
Yeah. Audience or digital? Is there more questions?
Yeah, one just came in, if we can ask one more.
Yeah.
What multifamily opportunities do you see for more rural areas looking to start expanding their offerings to workforces? Would you suggest more consumer-friendly pricing or space prioritization?
Good question.
I think all, right? I mean, I think you need to have all components, especially in rural areas. But, once again, I think, affordability comes into it. You have market force, multifamily, and a lot of it really, I think there's a lot of opportunities, but, there has to be the jobs there, and that demand to actually build it. And I think there's different incentives, whether it's through the state or through local governments, to actually go into rural communities or places that maybe there isn't a huge demand, but yet still be able to give a product to the community that can help with all walks, whether it's workforce, affordable, market rent, transient housing. I think there's opportunities across all those sectors, and I think trying to figure out how to put them all together is the key.
Anything to add from you two? How we doing? Should we,
Could I ask one more to Kyle?
yeah,
So earlier it was mentioned that with more manufacturing coming back to the United States, and then also with the whole inland port discussion that we've been having with the satellite ports here in Utah, is there a good chance for some of this manufacturing to come to rural Utah? And specifically, how do you, if you foresee it in Carbon-Indian County?
So the answer is yes, I believe that there is, and a lot of that has to do with the existing rail infrastructure and all of the constituent components of carbon fiber that carbon creates, and I know a lot of that on a raw materials basis is coming out of this area now, but there's really no room for expansion anymore for companies like Hexcel up in Salt Lake County. And the Boeings and Lockheeds and all the companies that need to have a proximity to an airport are becoming less and less reliant on having the sheet carbon fiber and all of that built in such close proximity, because it's generally a longer lead time item. So anything that is carbon nanotechnology, sporting goods, manufacturing, those types of things that can take advantage of the proximity to the natural resource, and then the abundance of energy and the abundance of workforce. So, it's extremely expensive to build out the infrastructure for those types of manufacturing operations. There may be a opportunity in the future for medical device or something like that. Those generally want to be in closer proximity to research universities. So I know there has been some discussion about some adjunct campuses down here that I think would be a real boon to anything that is R&D related, because they want that talent and that kind of ability to liaise with the universities and the students that are kind of on leading edge technologies.
cool. Thank you. How we doing, boss man?
I think we want to wrap it up.
Cool. Thank you, Bobby and Kyle and JR.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. I know you're all very busy. Thank you, Jerry and Jade from the Silicon Slopes East chapter, and thank you for everyone in attendance who are socially distanced, by the way. And I think it might be fun, Jade, to, in a year from now, maybe have the same panel in some sort of format to see how right we were, or you were. I just asked a question.
Bring it on.
And see, hopefully a lot's changed. Hopefully, like, baseball's being played and college football's not in doubt. Yeah, again, thank you. Thank you all for your time. And I know there's a lot of people's time and efforts that went into this behind the scenes. Thanks to them as well. So, yeah, if you're a medical doctor or an epidemiologist, please work hard so we don't have to wear these masks when we're back in 1 year doing this. So, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks.